Hey, this is George Aliferis, and you're listening to the FinTech Files. I'm joined by Matt Cockayne, the Chief Commercial Officer at Yapily. Tune in if you want to understand the possibilities offered by open banking and open finance. And if you're a FinTech brand builder, Matt will share amazing insights on how to build and scale a commercial team in the B2B space. Matt, thank you so much for being here. Welcome to FinTech Files.
Thanks for having me, George. Looking forward to the discussion.
Traditionally, I ask about how the COVID affected you and the company. We know there's been news about your great round of funding in April. You guys are doing absolutely great. Business is booming, I guess. How does it feel to work there?
It's interesting, isn't it? Because we've gone through this whole flip. And as a fintech, we were used to kind of being 5 days a week in the office, spending all of our time with each other. And pretty much overnight, we've had to flip to this remote dynamic. And then on the back of our funding, we've nearly doubled the size of the business and headcount-wise. So we've got a whole 50% of the company now have not been into the office or have only been in occasionally and kind of have missed that dynamic. So how you pivot the firm to be able to include those people and make sure they're onboarded so they can start adding value and actually feel part of the company has been a challenge, but I think we're improving ourselves. I'm actually in the office today. Most of my commercial team, we're coming in once or twice a week just to spend some time with each other. People are comfortable coming in, and that's helped speed up kind of the delivery of people actually being part of that team and working more effectively together.
Boarding a lot of people right now, I mean, could you imagine that's a challenge? Sorry, especially if someone is, I don't know if you hire new graduates, but I wouldn't imagine someone who also hasn't been molded into the corporate world and straight into work from home now. That would be quite interesting.
Yeah, we have a couple of them, but actually, interestingly, they're more keen to be in the office.
Sure.
So someone who recently joined me as an SDR into my sales team, they want to be in the office 4 days a week because they have they're just more comfortable here than being in their flat they're sharing with housemates. And so we enable them if they want to do that to be in. But yeah, I think if it's your first job, it's probably a tricky working environment to come straight into.
So well done for all that. Now, a few questions about your career, Matt. So I see on LinkedIn you've had a lot of experience in tech, fintech. What attracted you to that industry in the first place?
Oh, it's an interesting question. So many years ago, I started as a management consultant. I'm actually a geologist by training.
All right.
But at the time, it was the last oil crash, and there weren't a huge amount of geology jobs. So I became a management consultant. Did that for a few years. But actually, I was overseeing a lot of the software companies and kind of project managing those deliveries. And I thought it'd be interesting to try and see it from the other side and actually go and work for a vendor. So I moved to a commodities trading vendor and then did that for probably 10, 12 years, running the European arms of these US firms from a professional services side, an account management side, a sales side. And it's just a different perspective from kind of the pure consulting world to actually the vendor side where you're actually delivering the software that powers businesses and powers their solutions, whether that's a trading platform, whether that's a fintech platform. It's really quite different from the consulting side where you're giving advice and running programs, but you're not actually touching that end deliverable.
Sure. And that's, I guess, you get plenty of that as Chief Commercial Officer. You're right in the middle of the action, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, coming to Yapily was really exciting. I was number 12 in the door with the opportunity to build a commercial function from scratch. So when I say that, I mean sort of sales, inside sales, marketing, and customer success. That's for full customer engagement piece. And we've had to build it from scratch, both on processes, people, but also the tools and the platforms that we use behind that.
Wow, fantastic. That's something definitely we want to talk a bit about, your marketing, sales, how they work together. But first, let's talk a bit about Yapily for our audience. So can you tell us in a few words what you do?
Sure. So Yapily, we're an open finance connectivity platform. What I mean by that is we take away the complexity of connecting to all of these open banking APIs that have been delivered around Europe. We standardize those, we normalize them. So you as a customer can connect to just our one API and get access to all of these. We then maintain those APIs and any changes the banks make to them, we do for you. That then enables our customers to build great propositions on top of using open banking data, whether it's using the transaction data side for like accounting solutions or PFM solutions, or whether it's using the payment side for saving people money and moving off kind of credit cards and those kind of payments things. So we're seeing lots of interest in both sides. Our customers range from B2B big corporates like IBM and Intuit, through to scale-up fintechs like Go Cardless and Money Farm, through to startups who can have a couple of people and a great idea. We can power all of those platforms.
All right, so let's just to go back into it, because for me, and I guess open finance is something that, open banking is something that's been already talked a lot about and kind of regulated, or forced by the regulator. So from open banking to open finance, it's about the integration of all the banking services and making it available, kind of a one point of entry through the API. Is that a good definition?
Yeah, pretty much. So regulation in Europe has driven what's called open banking, or PSD2, for the banks to have to present in an API all the data for a customer on their payment accounts. So this is kind of step one. So this is kind of the split between open banking and open finance. Open banking is just payment accounts, so your credit card, current account, some savings accounts, that a bank has to make available via an API for a regulated third party to access. That can then, you as a consumer or as a business, can then share your data with other firms to get better financial services, whether that's getting a cheaper loan, whether that's getting a better savings rate, whether that's getting reconciliation for an accounting platform. All of those can be done through this. Open finance is about then broadening that beyond just those, the narrow scope of PSD2 and open banking, onto all of your financial products. And really, we see it as kind of a three-stage process. So it's open banking as a foundation, open finance then sits on top of it, and then it's kind of an open X. And a good example of this is in Australia. They have something called consumer data right. That is all of your financial products that a bank holds are put into an API. They're then talking about going to energy. They're then talking about going to telco. And actually, you as a consumer being able to access all of your data via API services and then get better services and kind of create a bit more competition. So when we talk about it, it's kind of open banking, open finance, open X, because this is the way the world is moving. And we're at the heartbeat of that, and kind of trying to drive standardization and make it easy for people to consume this data.
All right, yes, so that's what I observed in terms of the product, or how Yapily presents its product. It seems to be a simple one product interface, and I guess you're aggregating and making it simpler is a big part of the deal. But how hard is it to? So you're coming from something very, very complex. How hard is it to put it together as one? As I mentioned, one door or one entry point for your consumer, for your clients.
It's constantly a lot of work, would be the honest answer to that. We're built for open banking from the ground up. So we in some respects are lucky that we're only 3 years old as a firm. We haven't had to build any of the legacy technology that other firms have had to build. The flip side of that is that we've had to build it all in 3 years. So we've built ourselves for more open banking from the ground up. So the architecture is designed for these pieces. If I tell you today that 6,500 banks or institutions across Europe are under the scope of PSD2, only probably 1,000 have APIs up at the moment. But each of those APIs is different. Even in the UK, where there's a standard and there's an order around what the biggest banks have to do, each of them have implemented it in a different way. As soon as you go into Europe, every country's done it in a different way. And there's been less adherence to a formal standard. So there's lots of complexity and nuance around the way different banks will interpret that standard. So that's why the build versus buy conversation is really, really interesting if you're looking for a pan-European partner or you're looking to use open banking in multiple countries. That will be a lot of heavy lifting for you if you try to do it yourself. Whereas you could get a partner like ourselves or one of the other firms to kind of take that complexity away for you.
Well, that's something that I found really fascinating about this, because it seems like, first of all, the open banking is not fully completed yet. Like you said, there's 1,000 out of the 6,000, and then the complexity of it. And then we still, you mentioned startups that are using it, and I'm sure there's plenty of opportunities, but it seems like it's also in terms of culture in our minds, we haven't yet probably explore all the possibilities that it offers, right? And I'm not talking about OpenX, just the open finance or open banking stage. Do you see a lot of entrepreneurs trying to, seize the opportunity and building something new out of the new possibility?
Absolutely. I think if we talk kind of use cases that people can think of for open banking and open finance, What we know today is probably a significant subset of what it will be in 12 months or in 24 months. People are coming up with new ideas and how you can solve this on a daily or a weekly basis. And that's great to see. I mean, we talk about kind of open finance. How can you use this data in pensions? How can you use it in investments? How can you use it in insurance? All of these markets are looking at how they can use this, actually build better propositions for customers. Interestingly, it's not just the kind of fintechs. We're also seeing some of the large corporates come to the market as well, which I think is really where the large adoption will get driven from. So a large corporate with a big installed customer base starts to deploy great solutions using open banking and open finance. That will really kind of build customer usage and credibility around it. And I think to some extent, it's not so important about whether customers have heard about open banking or open finance. It's more about, are they using propositions which are being powered by it? That for me is kind of the sign of success. And we've got to remember, this is a market that's 2 years old. So it's still in its infancy. Yet it's still great. There's a lot of enthusiasm in the market, but it's still 2 years old. So it still has that maturity process to go through where you'll get mass adoption. If you look at something like contactless took 10 years to get adoption. I'm not expecting it to take 10 years. I think we're on that inflection point where there are some big players coming to market that will really start to drive usage. And I think COVID, to some extent, is driving that journey as well. I think the ability to share your financial data and get better solutions with branches shut and all the pieces that we're going through from that is really important. And then actually be able to save money by making open banking payments. It's great for merchants, particularly in things like hospitality or travel, which have been very heavily hit by COVID. So I think those pieces will actually accelerate adoption to some extent.
Yeah, this is what I found so fascinating about financial technology. Eventually, there's great technology behind it, and that in itself is a really interesting and passionate thing to look into if it's what you're into. But ultimately, it's about the end result, end consumer. And sometimes my references are very old, so I always refer to Jack Bogle, who introduced the index funds and ETFs, passive investment. And there was an article in Bloomberg saying he must have saved $1 trillion in fees to the investment world. So would you think that's a good comparison for the open finance effort? We could see, I don't know if it's savings or of time or money or other benefits for the consumer.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a really good comparison because it's not something we should be looking at in kind of the narrow lens of what's been progressed in the last 12 months, what's going to happen in the next 12 months. It's more about what's this transformation going to drive. I've worked, as you alluded to earlier, I've worked in financial services and technologies for a long time. People talked about transformation for decades. This is one of those actually transformative moments that once the momentum continues to build on it, will actually be transformative in how people can get access to financial services. If you're currently have a thin credit file or no credit file, it's really hard for you to get any credit. Open banking allows you to actually be able to share that, look, here are my earnings, here's my outgoings, and actually in real time share your data. And so it's opening access for a bunch of financial services that you just wouldn't be able to access before. That's just one example of where it's going to be transformative. I think the option to replace significant card fees that merchants pay and that users might pay in different countries is going to be quite transformative in how payments landscape works. You talked kind of before we started about payments transformation. I think this is transformative for payments. Is it going to be transformative in the next 6 months? Maybe not. Will it be in the next 18 months, 36 months? Absolutely.
Yeah, just go back to Jack Bogle. I think it took, I don't remember, many years, too long to get to 1 billion, and then there were billions coming every year. It's accelerated to 5 trillions now. So I guess that's something we can wish to Yapily and to the industry. And if we zoom in a bit more and try to figure out, so how does it actually work for someone? Maybe I've got a great idea in terms of what I could do with open finance with the data from X. How does it work in terms of implementation? And also, is there a difference between API? I see on your website there's the scoring thing for APIs. What makes a good API? Too many questions bundled in one.
Yeah, that's all right. There's probably 2 questions there. So how do you get started? So you can play in the sandboxes on our APIs. You can sign up to our API for free on the website. Go and play in the sandboxes. We've built a bunch of the bank sandboxes, so you can see how the data works and how you can make the calls and different things like that. To get started, it's just a commercial relationship with ourselves. Someone has to be regulated. So either you have to be regulated yourself, or you can use our license in specific ways. That can get you started in the pricing. You can have startup pricing. You can get started straight away. What makes a good API? So the API scoring piece we've done, we monitor all of the APIs we're connected to from the banks in real time. So we thought it would be useful to give a taster of both speed, but also so you can see who's the fastest in response times. And then actually from a kind of a Yapily score piece that we've built, which is around kind of the complexity of the payload that's being delivered, how much data is coming in that piece. So that's kind of our attempt at saying, hey, look, this looks like good APIs. These are easy to connect to. These are returning the data in a reasonable amount of time for the amount of complexity, because some banks can return, some of the big high street banks will return 7 years of data. If you try and pull that in one go, that's going to take a while to come through. Versus you're kind of, maybe you have a neobank account that you use just for buying coffee every now and then, and because of lockdown, you haven't bought much coffee. So there's not many transactions to pull. So it's about kind of trying to give a fair view of what does an average payload look like that we're pulling, and trying to then score the banks on that. And hopefully this is just seen as the fact that the banks have made really good progress over the past year or so in getting stable, fully functioning APIs. There's still some way to go. As with all things, you can always improve on it. But it's also a sign to say, hey, look, this is what good looks like. And by the way, some of these at the bottom, maybe you guys need to look at improving a bit. Because at the end of the day, it's about the end user engagement. If they have a great experience, they're going to use more of these services.
Yeah, and it's really interesting what you mentioned about the license, because from a fintech entrepreneur perspective, what the difference is, if you're a full entrepreneur, you can probably get started with ban or whatever. In fintech or in whatever touches finance, this license always puts a very high barrier to entry. But from what I understand, well, I guess there's more than just an idea, but you could really start from that, right? You could
absolutely
probably get the early stages by just having an idea, playing the sandbox.
Yeah, you want to build something with a great payments journey using open banking, app-to-app journey. You can get started really quickly with us. You can connect in 15 minutes to the API, off you go. It really is quite simple. If you want to display the data back and kind of build a more PFM or accounting type solution, it's a little bit more complicated
Sure.
from a regulatory point of view. But if you just want to use it for the payments, it's really easy to get started.
It sounds like such a fascinating solution. So I'm also really interested to see if there are any challenges in terms of marketing. I guess there are, because I guess you deal with complex processes and multiple stakeholders. But may I ask you, what do you think is your main marketing challenge?
I think a lot of it's still around education to some extent. When you work in fintech, you sometimes exist in this bubble where you think everybody else knows all about this stuff, especially in London. So I think it's actually the education. I'd say the majority of the engagement we have with prospects is around educating about what is open banking, what is open finance, how can it solve business problems for you, much more than kind of what's the API response time on kind of Monzo versus Barclays, or how do I access data. It's much more, what business problems can I solve using this stuff? So that's kind of the way we try to engage with our market around how can we solve your business problems using open banking, either using the transaction data or using the payments. Payments is really a good one. Like, do you want quicker and cheaper payments? Most people would say yes. So that's an immediate hook that you can have that conversation with. If you're talking around kind of wealth management, it's like, would you like to see the full financial health of your customers? Yeah, I would. Great. Okay, this is how we can help you with that. So it's more around those very high level education. And then as people move through the funnel, and they become qualified leads and kind of go through, you start to share more knowledge and you can have a more detailed conversation. But if you try and talk to someone about regulatory approaches for using open banking, it's the first conversation. You'll generally just scare them off. And I think it's important that we all kind of reflect on the fact that outside kind of the Shoreditch or city bubble, a lot of people haven't heard about open banking. They might have heard something about it, but they really understand how it can help them. So that's the experience they want to go through. How can this solve problems for me and make my business easier?
Yeah, and so one thing I've noticed from Yapily, first the name, which has some happy connotation, but also the whole branding and website, the yellow, the simplicity stands out very very colorful, and it really stands out in this B2B space where, well, that comes maybe later, or for very large companies. So was it something that was from the start? Did it come with perhaps the latest round of investment, and how does that help in your very serious B2B conversations?
Absolutely, great conversation. When I joined last year, our website was very much a developer portal in the kind of the blue, white, and kind of dark blue color scheme that has been popularized by Stripe. And a lot of fintechs seem to take that as their kind of their style guide. And it was really good as a developer portal, but it wasn't very engaging for business users. So it's people who kind of come in to say, how can this solve my business problem? It wasn't very good for that. So we took a noticeable view that we want to be different. We want to stand out from our competition, but also from the market. And so from a branding perspective, we want to have some color. We want to have some strong color accents. We also want it to be quite clean. So we engaged with an agency. I hired a head of marketing who's done an excellent job on this piece, and she really drove that project for us. And it was her vision around how we engage with color and how we actually use that to accent our pieces. And as a style guide, we have that driven through all of our presentations and all of our pieces. So the API score piece you mentioned, that's kind of in the same branding structure. And it's really about how do we try and stand out and be a bit different from our competition, so that if someone engages with some of our content, they then recognize other content when they encounter it on the website, whether it's on LinkedIn, whether it's on one of our sponsors pieces that we do with various conferences. They recognize some of our content and they engage with it just from the kind of the style and the content.
Yeah, I'm sure that's a very precious asset, especially all these now every aspect of finance in open banking. There's quite a few competitors, so I'm sure that helps a lot. It's also interesting what you mentioned about head of marketing, which again, sometimes I know a lot of B2B companies which don't have a marketing, or have marketing which does design and maybe PowerPoint and stuff like that. But here for you, marketing is an important function, right? And how does that? The typical question is how does it integrate with sales? So is it first of all under your remit?
Yeah, absolutely. So
that makes perfect sense. Yeah,
I was very clear when I joined, when I was discussing with Stefano, that I wanted marketing and sales to be really aligned and work together. I've worked in so many software firms where marketing throws stones at sales. Sales throws stones at marketing. The typical thing of, look at all these leads I've qualified. You guys are useless in sales. You can't qualify them. And sales will just turn around and go, yeah, but the leads are useless. They're not our target market, and we can't close them because they're not really qualified. So to avoid that kind of fight, which isn't that helpful in a startup and a scale-up mode, we put them both in the same functions. That's why I have kind of a chief commercial officer title rather than a chief revenue officer. Because it's not just about the sales, it's also about the marketing and how we align those pieces together. And we've actually ensured that our SDR functions, so our inside sales, is very closely aligned with marketing. So our inbound, outbound campaigning and our messaging is all very synced together. And this is actually delivering quite good flow through the funnel now. And we see significantly higher kind of on the things you track in marketing, like open rates of emails, click-through rates, things like that. Ours is significantly higher than industry average that we're driving through. So I think it's working to that extent. But it was a very deliberate approach to try to put the two pieces together. I think the days of having standalone sales and marketing are somewhat behind us. At least I hope so.
Yeah, absolutely as well. And also I think eventually consumers, even enterprise clients, etc., they're so used of having things which are, branded in a certain way, easy to access, etc., in their daily life, that it's hard for them to put a different brain on and have a clunky corporate brands and presentation and interfaces and things like that. So, as I mentioned, it definitely Yapily stands out immediately to that. And you mentioned that education is very important for you, and I guess you create a lot of content into that. So how does that? How do sales and marketing work together, or how do you go about publishing content?
So I think there's kind of your thematic approach you're trying to take for that quarter of what themes are we trying to run this quarter and how does the content align to those? And we'll kind of run that on a quarter. We'll have a different theme for each quarter, but then equally aligned to what does our pipeline look like and where are we winning, and how do we feed back kind of why we win and the type of clients we're winning with into that thematic approach. So if we're doing a payments theme for, say, Q3, how do we feed back into that? And how are we focusing our outbound prospecting onto those specific areas where we're pushing all our content? So that's kind of the perfect example of why you want to have sales and marketing aligned. Because if you're spending money and effort in producing this content and advertising it and kind of getting it in front of the right eyeballs, you then want to be trying to engage with those type of users from a sales perspective. And it might mean that the sales cycle doesn't close in that quarter, but as long as you've engaged them and you've started that part and you've qualified them and you're moving those deals through the pipeline, that's the critical piece. I think so often you see marketing functions that have thematic approaches, like here's our Q1 approach, here's our Q2 approach, here's our Q3. Sales go, yeah, that's nice. I'm just going to go and speak to these people over here who actually don't come into any of those themes at all, but they think they can sell a deal there. They might well sell the deal, but therefore, why are you bothering to spend all that money on those marketing pieces? So that I think it's really important that you have those pieces aligned. And obviously, there'll be the odd exception where opportunities come in through something else they've seen from another campaign that's still playing through and has got some ripple effect on. But generally, you want to, if you're running a wealth management campaign, you want to be targeting as a sales function wealth management firms as well during that process, because that's just the most sensible thing to try to do.
Sure. No, it makes perfect sense. It's so hard to do for, I think, quite a few firms, or I guess the legacy of the organization is, creates hurdles on that. But it seems to be working really well at Yapily. And are you exploring many channels? Are there any particular ones that work well for you?
So LinkedIn is a really strong channel for us. Because we're B2B, we've found that to be the strongest. We haven't really done much with kind of the Twitter, Instagram, Facebook type channels. And we certainly haven't touched TikTok. Much as a bunch of my team are Gen Zers, they want to look at that stuff. I don't think my target buying audience are using those tools. So LinkedIn is a really important channel for us. But also it allows you very specific marketing and kind of targeting against your audience that you want to specify. So our followers have increased significantly this year. On the back of our Series A, we've got a big spike in our digital engagement, and that's just continued through. I mean, I think from when we launched our new website, probably January when we launched that, we've seen a lot more engagement on our digital footprint, and hopefully that will continue to increase. I mean, I think COVID has pivoted a lot of our spend onto digital channels compared to where we had more of a split between digital and physical events. Virtual of that money is now gone into digital channels.
Yeah, fair enough. And I could see, as a marketer, I could tell a few things that really should be improved on LinkedIn. I still think it's frustrating. And they themselves, when they post tutorial videos, they post on YouTube as a little anecdote of what they can improve. But it's true that it's an amazing platform for now content, creating followers on your company suddenly has a lot of value. Whereas not so long ago, it was about, how do I find a job, or
Yeah.
So making the most of it is becoming a science and an art.
And I think it's also the job section is definitely still there. And I think if you have a strong follower piece and you're producing content that engages with people, that actually makes it easier to find good quality employees as well, because they might engage with some of that content through their feed. And actually, if they're looking for a role, that might then stimulate them to come and look for a job with you. And generally, we have at least 10 to 20 jobs on at any time due to our growth. So if you work in tech, it would generally be a type of role that we're looking for. I suspect that would align.
Right. Let's move on to your outlook and possibly advice to other areas of fintech and fintech entrepreneurs. What's the thing that's most exciting? Well, what's the area that's you're most excited about in terms of what you do?
I think it's the fact that we're really at the starting point to some extent. Like, the opportunity is so big of what open finance can do that we're really just in the foothills at the moment, and yet there's still a lot of traction. So that where that could grow to is huge. And that for me is the really exciting thing. It's a new industry. And then for me personally, scaling a commercial function from scratch has been a challenge, but great and really enjoyable, rather than having to inherit someone else's sales processes or someone else's marketing approach, someone else's tools and processes. Actually building that from scratch has been great. And I think the opportunity for us to continue to scale beyond, like, across Europe, and then next year into other territories. Open banking is now in process in kind of 50, 60 countries globally. So actually going into other markets and really taking some of the learnings that we've had in Europe and taking those, whether it's into APAC, Latin America, Africa, that's a really exciting opportunity. I think the trick as a fintech is always try to be laser focused, and if you try to do it all, you'll fail. So for us, being able to prioritize about which countries and which markets we want to go and participate in is really where the strategy piece brings its value to some extent. Because if you try and do it all, whilst it looks great on a VC presentation of like, look at all these countries we're going to be in, actually it's really, really tricky to do that many countries.
Yes, I can imagine, especially if we talk about not just OpenX globally. Suddenly, I guess it's hard to focus on the next little country in Europe, maybe, which we need to conquer.
But it's always that split between kind of tactically, what do I need to do that's right in front of my nose, and strategically, where am I going to be in 3, 6, 9 months? And that balance between where you spend your time is really important.
And if you reverse the question and we look at what fintech, well, let's ask maybe first in terms of what established companies can do. If you have any advice for established companies that want to leverage the possibilities of open finance.
So I think there's kind of a really good example would be go and read our white paper about open finance. It has some great examples of where this could be transformative for lots of different industries. It's not just PFM, lending and accounting. It touches so many markets, both financial services providers, but also for non-FS companies. So go and have a read of our white paper. That might stimulate some great ideas, and then come and talk to us. We're experts in this. We understand the use cases. We understand how we can power you for that. But equally, we'd love to hear some great new use cases. Come and tell me something I haven't heard of before, of how you can use open banking or how you're looking to use it. And let's help you put it into action.
And I guess that's the same thing for wannabe entrepreneurs or entrepreneurs in fintech. From what I discovered now with you, it would be a pity not to explore this just because it's there and there's so many opportunities, right? Just like I said, we're at the foot of the hill.
Yeah, absolutely. It's myself and my team encounter great entrepreneurs with fantastic ideas every day. So the more of those we speak to, and that's kind of when you come to what excites you. That's exciting. It's not like we're selling a SAP solution and you know exactly what it is, and you're selling it to the same people in a certain market size every time. A lot of people we talk to are completely looking to use it in a completely different way. And like as a commercial team, that's really exciting because it means every conversation is different. So like you get up in the morning, you don't know quite what pitch we're going to have today. What's the use case that a customer is going to ask for? And can we do it out of the box? Is there a bit of customization we need to do? How's this compare against other people in the market? Those kind of conversations are great. And they're just really exciting.
Good place to be. That's been fantastic, Matt. Thank you so much for all your insights. As usual, we'll finish with some quick and lighthearted questions. So first, what would you do if you were to choose a different career path? Well, you mentioned geology, but anyway, what if it was anything?
Well, I did try to be a professional rugby player many years ago. Unfortunately, a fractured neck and a bust knee prepared to that. So that would have been fun. What could I do it now? No, I'm too old and unfit these days. But doing something with rugby would be great. If money was no object, it'd be great to go and do coaching and kind of inspiring the next generation of people who want to do that kind of sport. Would be great.
Wonderful. That answers maybe the next question as well, the talent or passion that your listeners and followers may not know about.
Probably rugby. All of my team would know about that, and I'm now subjecting my boys to it as well. At least we were before lockdown. So Sunday mornings down at the rugby club, a nice way for them to burn off some energy.
Wonderful. And as we are emerging from lockdown, and I don't know if you managed to escape or you're thinking about it, what would be your favorite place for holidays?
I love going to Greece. It's just like the food.
Excellent choice from a Greek French.
I'd love to go back there. Had some lovely holidays there recently. We're actually going to Devon next week. I thought I'd try and be a bit more not put myself at the risk of government policy changing on a regular basis for travel. So yeah, I'd love to go back to Greece, or a bit further afield, go to Barbados. Lovely place as well. I can see you can now get a year's remote worker permit for Barbados. I'm kind of trying to convince Stefano that we should do that for our team.
All right, good luck with that. Thank you so much, Matt. It's been wonderful. I really enjoyed learning about the possibilities of open finance. It's been really mind-blowing for me. So yeah, thank you so much for your time.
Excellent. Thanks for having me on, George.